Good morning, everyone. So nice to have you with us this morning. A quick note that we are recording this session, so you'll be able to find it later. But I want to talk for a minute as I welcome you to one of many sessions in this webinar series on energy resilience and COVID-19. We are really thinking a lot about pivoting in 2020 and what the next few months are going to look like. My name is Anna Siefken. I'm the Executive Director for the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation at Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm very glad to have you here. We have many esteemed guests with us today, and I will introduce them in just a couple of minutes as we talk about this topic. But first, I want to tell you a minute about Carnegie Mellon. Many of you on the line know who we are. The Scott Institute is the energy hub at Carnegie Mellon, and so we work specifically on collaborative research, partnerships. We do a lot with entrepreneurship, particularly because our students are so interested. And that's one of the reasons that we're bringing this important group of investors here with us today. So the purpose of this webinar overall is to really look at what are the key strategies that people are already employing and that others can learn from as we plan and move through 2020. And I tell you, when we started this webinar series, we had no idea how long we would be in. And we are now looking at what coming back to a university looks like in the fall. So for those of you in the same boat, some of the things that we're talking about today about how to get companies back up and running is an important part of our conversation. So this is our 7th webinar in the series. It's about balancing investment in innovation and commercialization. And it's really intended for how corporates, nonprofits, and founders can really address change. So I want to say a special thank you to our 4 partnering organizations today: Chain Reaction Innovations out of Argonne National Lab, Prime Impact Fund, VertueLab, and Energy Foundry. Some incredible thought leadership here with us today. So we do have additional webinars that we're planning, as I mentioned, through December. So we've decided to go ahead and continue this virtual platform to the end of the year. So our next 4 sessions, plus a special one for students coming up. In August, we are talking about transportation energy, and we have the leader of our Pittsburgh Port Authority, our bus and transportation system, joining us with a few key faculty and leaders from the community. We have an interesting thread coming together around energy and equity, and we'll be looking at workforce on August the 20th. On September the 3rd, we'll be looking at batteries and storage, which is a critically important topic for getting all kinds of clean energy and renewable technologies moving forward. And then we have another group of investors coming together on September 17th to talk about supply chain impact on energy business valuation. So look out for that one. Those of you who are students and those of you who are participating in our Energy Hackathon, we are doing our 2nd Energy Hackathon at the end of September. It will be virtual. So those of you who are here can watch the results and be a part of the activity. So have a topic or special suggestion for one of these webinars as we plan. You can email my colleague Daniela Grieman and she will add that to our list. So for today, I am going to turn to quick introductions for our panelists. So our first panelist is Jo Brickman. She's the Deputy Director and Director of Impact Strategy at VertueLab, which is a nonprofit fighting climate crisis and creating shared prosperity by providing funding and holistic entrepreneurial support for cleantech startups. The organization started in 2010, and she's translated her previous decade of experience leading sustainable design into innovation for a sustainable built environment. So welcome, Jo. Amy Duffuor is principal at Prime Impact Fund. She has responsibility to identify and evaluate investment opportunities, lead investments, and serve on boards of portfolio companies. Prime Impact Fund invests in transformative technology companies with the potential for gigaton scale climate impact. Welcome, Amy. Next, we have Judy Lee, who drives new investment activity at Energy Foundry, which is an early stage clean tech venture fund in Chicago. She oversees Energy Foundry's 750 or so startups per year with deal flow pipeline to due diligence and funding the best opportunities. And we have Adria Wilson, who is the Entrepreneurial Program lead at Chain Reaction Innovations, where she works with each cohort of innovators as they develop their clean energy technology ventures. She has a passion for enabling transformative climate tech and a diverse set of experiences in clean energy fields, previously working as a legislative aide on Capitol Hill and as a program manager with EERE at the DOE. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share and bring everyone more into focus. So here we are. Thank you all so much for being here. We certainly appreciate all of your expertise. And I'm going to jump right into questions. I do want to remind all of our participants on the line that we are answering questions as we go. So there's a Q&A at the bottom. So use the Q&A more than the chat. It's much easier to track. So first question, and we will just dive right in. So question for all of you. And as we go through, everyone doesn't have to answer every question. So please just answer the questions that really resonate with you. So the question is, what strategies do you think we should employ in recovery? So are there lessons or insights learned from maybe even 2008 recovery that we should use now? And what types of changes should we be thinking about as we observe lessons from the past? So with that, I'm actually going to ask Joe to speak to this one first.
Thanks, Anna. You know, our organization, VertueLab, was founded in the wake of the 2008 recession, and we have a ton of experience with helping companies make it out of that one. And I think some of the real lessons that we learned were that federal funding in the form of the SBIR and STTR program were a real lifesaver during those years when a lot of private capital was tied up and unavailable. And we're really encouraging our companies and providing support to them in pursuing those through our grant, SBIR, STTR support programs. And those programs exist in many states. They're supported by the federal government through a program called FAST, and there's 20 states that have federally funded support programs for pursuing SBIR and STTR funding. I definitely recommend that. And we're also, the other strategy that has been key in these really rapidly changing contexts is just to stay super close to your customer and continuing to circle back to them to understand their changing needs of their customer and understand, you know, what circumstances they're dealing with so that you can be responsive and agile.
Amy, do you want to speak next?
Yeah, no, that would be great. And thank you so much for having me, Anna. And I'm really excited to be here. So yeah, I think there are a lot of lessons that we can.
Amy, I'm not sure. I might be the only one who's seeing you sideways, but I want to.
There
we go. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, great. Sorry, everyone. I am having some strange connectivity issues, so hopefully everyone can see me and hear me all right. But yeah, so I think there are a number of lessons that we can take from 2008 and particularly the financial crisis when thinking about this moment and how a number of different startups can leverage some of the past lessons learned. So after the financial crisis, there had been a wave of interest in clean energy, you know, clean tech, climate tech focused startups as a way for people to really think about marrying sort of business acumen with passion for social or environmental impact. And I think something similarly is going to happen, you know, given this current crisis that we're in. These are really challenging times. And I think with the broader pandemic, with the protests around racial injustice, there is going to be more attention that's really paid towards impactful companies, whether that is in the broader environment or socially. And I think that, you know, there's a real opportunity for companies that are focusing on clean energy, that are focusing on climate technology, that are focusing on clean technology to really leverage this moment, particularly with regards to investors who may be looking for companies to invest in. And whether that is, you know, being more explicit about some of the impact metrics that you're tracking, there is a tool called the Impact Measurement Project that's led by Bridges Foundation, which is great. That focuses on a whole host of social or environmental metrics that could make you be more outwardly or externally explicit about the impact that you have. At Prime, we've worked with a number of partners to come up with a tool called Crane, which is a climate impact measurement tool. And that stands for Carbon Reduction Assessment of New Enterprises. It's an open source tool online. And again, these are all different tools and techniques that, as I believe there's going to be much more interest in kind of clean energy focused companies, that these startups can use these tools to more effectively quantify their impact and speak a language to investors that really resonates with them.
Judy, do you want to answer this one too?
Sure. So totally agree with everything Joe and Amy said. Another perspective that I wanted to provide was, are you hearing me okay?
We are.
Okay, so another perspective I wanted to provide was just some of the things that we've been telling the companies we've invested in to look out for, and in case that's helpful. And so while Energy Foundry, as a venture fund, we weren't investing back in 2008, but what we did is we talked with a lot of other venture investors who were to try to learn those learnings from them. And one of the things that became very clear was companies that were so focused on becoming as profitable as soon as possible were the ones that ultimately made it through the economic recession, the ones that were able to manage cash efficiently and effectively, and were able to cut their spend, were the ones that could make it through. And then they were left, as a stronger business, a more resilient business, in order to take advantage of whatever new opportunities came forward in the economy.
So next question. So with regards to sort of intersectionality and equity in the clean tech sector, because obviously equity is an important topic for all of us to be thinking about. So what does thinking differently mean when it comes to startups and their investors? What strategies have you heard about? What are some organizations trying? And why don't we start with Adria on this one?
Sure. So from Chain Reaction's perspective, we've been talking a lot about equity and diversity and inclusion with our startups. I think if they weren't thinking about it before, they're thinking about it now because of the events of the last couple of months. And a lot of them have stepped up to say, we want to figure out how to build a diverse and inclusive environment. And our startups are very early stage, so 2 or 3 people, but I think they're recognizing and we're recognizing that that culture starts at the very beginning. And I think that ties into a broader recognition that to build a sustainable world, we need sustainable enterprises that also are diverse and inclusive. So we've been trying to create the space for innovators to talk with one another, to create resources that help them understand how to go about hiring in a diverse and inclusive way. And there are a lot of great resources on the internet for that. And also they've been sharing amongst themselves different resources for finding diversity or implementing diverse boards to their companies, because I think that's a big step too. One barrier that has sort of arisen from those conversations, and we don't have a really good way of dealing with this yet, is that creating a diverse hiring pipeline, for example, requires more resources because you want to be more thorough in the venues that you're reaching out to as a startup founder. And that costs money. So there's a tension between how do I find the best candidate and maintain diversity, and how do I manage my cash flow? And so as a program, we're thinking about how we might address that, but we haven't come up with a good way of doing that yet.
How about Joe and then Amy on this one?
Yeah, Adria, I think we've been thinking a lot of similar things. At VertueLab, we have an equity lens for our fund, and but it's really early days. We haven't. We're still fundraising for our current fund, and so it has not been fully tested. And there's really not much of a roadmap to follow. Not many funds out there have an equity lens, or if they do, there's not much of a replicable model for it. And there's lots of different approaches to it. So unfortunately, it sort of leaves us making it up as we go along. And we are really open source and wanting to learn and share what we're learning along the way. So I'm writing about it as we go. So there's a lot of unknowns there, but what we know is that investors are not investing nearly enough in women and in people of color. And we have an essentially racist structure that we're working within, and we're trying to make that change, but it's not quick, and it takes a lot of introspection to understand what are some of those implicit biases that are at work, and in some cases explicit structures that were set up specifically to deny access to people, and we're learning about those right now. And so as Adria was talking about supporting our portfolio companies in becoming better leaders and creating richer cultures within their own companies, we're doing that ourselves with our own organization. But and being able to embrace a diversity of different founders. It's a real journey that we're on, and I think that we're paying really close attention to the research there about implicit bias and helping our investment committee grow, helping our board grow, and ensuring that we have a fertile ground for diverse entrepreneurs when they come to us, that we're ready for them. And I would say further to Adria's comments about maintaining a diverse staff within a startup company, that's a large part of it. There's really interesting research done recently around, it was specific to the Portland environment, around why people of color are leaving the tech sector in droves in Portland. And I believe that there's similar research happening in other communities as well, but a lot of it comes down to the sort of surface niceness within cultures, but that isn't followed up with robust supports for people of color and women. I mean, I think a lot of similar a lot of similar things are at play, and that's where that intersectionality piece comes in. But I think the really stark concern is around race today.
Amy?
Yeah, I really like what you said, Joe, about it being a journey that you all are on. I would say very similarly for Prime, we are not an explicitly mandated diversity, equity, and inclusion fund, which means that, our mandate isn't to primarily invest in underrepresented founders, whether it's, women or people of color or, insert other identity group here. But we do care deeply about it, and it is something that we are taking seriously as an organization, and we are, at the beginning of our journey. I think one of the things that's been great about Prime is we are a women-led organization. Women, take up the majority of leadership positions. But kind of going back to your point, Anna, around intersectionality, we do have more work to do around, having more people of color in different parts of the organization. And one of the ways that we've been kind of formalizing this commitment is we recently received a grant from a large foundation to really embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into, a number of our processes. So, the first, place it could start with is around metrics. In venture capital, VCs are notoriously discreet and reticent about sharing any sort of demographic data. I think, having data that represents the field is really important. That's something that we're committed to, not only in terms of our founders and staff, but our board, a number of the different networks that we operate in. I think, getting good data is one of the first steps. Another area is with regards to our pipeline. I mean, part of that has to do with our pipeline partners, making sure that they're diverse and they also are focusing on underrepresented founders. Also, it has to do with the universities that we go to. Are we only going to, elite colleges? If, Prime is in the Cambridge area, so are we only going to Harvard and Stanford and MIT? Are we kind of broadening our network? Are we looking at women's colleges? Are we looking at historically Black colleges and universities to speak to professors, to speak to students? So taking a more holistic look in that sense. And then, Adria brought this up around a staff is really thinking too, not only with regards to the kind of the full-time investment and partnerships team staff at our organization, but also what does our board and our investment advisory committee look like? So, we are really starting this work. We're committed to doing the work. It is going to be a lot of work, and it's going to be a lot of learning. And I think the team is passionate and humbled to work with, outside support that we're going to be bringing in to also help us be on this journey. But it's really important, and I'm very grateful for this moment that's occurred, because I think it's brought a lot of these intersectional issues to light, and it rings very true for this broader sort of clean tech and climate tech space.
Okay. So our next question, and again, I'd like to encourage anyone who's on the call today to certainly type in a question and send it over. The question for you is, so how can founders, we've talked about new norms and how we have a lot of, there's any number of different pressures and new points that are coming together. So how can founders represent their value proposition in more than one way, or pivot their programming to meet new norms? So what messages are resonating with investors that might not have been important before? And I think that's an important thing. Like, how are people listening different, and are they asking the right questions? So why don't we start with Judy on this one, and then Joe and Amy. And Adria, we're going to get back to you. And oh wait, we'll have you answer this one as well.
All right, I'll be quick. So as far as what might resonate with investors, I think, like when you're making a sale of any product to a potential customer, you really need to know who they are and their profile, what they're looking for. And so I think the same thing applies as always, to do your homework and your research to understand the requirements of whoever you're pitching to and what they're looking for. For example, some funds have specific benchmarks in terms of climate change, CO2 emissions or whatnot that they want to see startups address, how much CO2 emission reduction they might be able to achieve. Others, have other kinds of benchmarks, revenue, whatever. For us, we don't specifically have any of those particular mandates, and that might adjust how you pitch. So another key thing more related to the current times is investors will be more sensitive to how a management team is responding to the current pressures. And so being honest about how COVID and a down economy is affecting your business, your customers, how it's making you rethink your business strategy. And those are really honest conversations to have, because an investor is going to want to ask those questions anyways. And it kind of shows how flexible or how quick the company is to pivot to go down the best, the best path ahead of you, given whatever's happening around you. So it's also a benefit to communicate how you've been able to incorporate this environmental feedback and changes to run a stronger business. And some companies are focusing on how COVID does improve their business. For some investors, this is very attractive. If for some, the stress in the economy is leading to some group of people or customers being more interested in your product or services, that's definitely something you want to highlight, because a lot of investors are are going to be limiting the capital they're putting out to companies that looks like it's obvious that they will have to be floundering for an uncertain amount of time until their customers are able to find their wallets again. And so I think the second point, well, actually, no, I think I covered everything. I'll let others cover their points.
How about Joe, and then Amy, and then Adria?
I would just say that it's very important to find investors that really understand your unique space. I think a lot of times we have clean tech that is really deep technology, and going to just any investor with your technology is not necessarily going to be the greatest strategy. So to Judy's point about knowing who your investors are, picking your investors based on who they are and their understanding of your space is going to be a way to be very efficient with your time. And I think others will probably have more to say on this one. So sit back.
Yeah, I just want to double click on both what Joe and Judy said. I think it's really important to know your investors, to be thoughtful, and as much as you can customize for the broad group of investors that you're looking at. Judy mentioned how some investors have specific thresholds for carbon emissions reductions. We have one of those at Prime. It's we invest in companies with gigaton scale climate impact. So if you pitch us your company and you don't mention anything about greenhouse gas emissions or your climate impact, especially in this environment where it's really challenging, that would probably signal to us that you haven't done your homework, and that we are one of many people that you're going out to, and it may not be the right sort of partnership, because we love to be hands-on partners with the companies that we support. And so I think just adding to what what else has been said about just being very thoughtful and doing your research on the groups of investors that you're speaking with is really critical.
Okay.
I guess I just wanted to sort of follow up everyone else with a note focused, I guess, specifically at the startups out there doing deep tech innovation work, that this is a good time as any to not only learn more about your investors and your potential investors, but to dive into your potential markets that you'll be expanding into, and to take the tools that are available to you through I-Corps, for example, and SBIR, STTR programs at different agencies that help you learn about your customers. And I think this ties into some of the dialogue that's been had already around getting to a point of revenue as fast as possible. It's not always easy for deep tech startups to do that, obviously. But if you can do more to learn about if there's a niche market that would pay for something while you're doing joint development, or just buy a small quantity to test it, which I guess is joint development. But the point being, if you can get to that point, you're getting there by learning more about your potential customer and the value chain, and that's all valuable. So just a point to add there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Really insightful answers. Obviously, knowing who our customers are at all different levels is an important part of these businesses. When I think about that, though, it leads me to sort of, what are some of the ways people are thinking about funding differently, creatively, maybe thinking about future disruption? Are there certain strategies that people should be thinking about for that? So Joe, we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, the strategy we've taken as an organization is to move into catalytic capital. And that's essentially capital that is risk tolerant, patient, and focused on impact. Right now, there's just not even close to enough money going into climate solutions from the traditional investment sector. And honestly, even philanthropy, only 2% of all philanthropy goes to climate issues. And that's, so there's a lot of potential though, and 2% of all philanthropy is a pretty big number, but that there's a really growing interest in that right now. VertueLab and Amy's fund Prime are both examples of funds that are leveraging catalytic capital in the form of philanthropic dollars from foundations, high net worth individuals, donor advised funds, moving that money really effectively through informed investments into clean tech. These tend to be investors that are very interested in having the kind of impact that clean tech can have, but they don't have the expertise in making clean tech investments. And so we can act as an informed intermediary in between the money interest and the people with the potential to make that impact, the technologists and the startups. And then I would say also that for later stage companies, we are seeing more and more interest from community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, because they're really innovating quickly. They're more agile as finance institutions, and they have been developing some really creative founder-friendly instruments for funding companies that are a little bit further along than the ones that we tend to be investing in.
Okay. So how about Judy and Amy?
I think the only thing I feel like I can add from things that I've been thinking on how do you find, how do you make more of this money available to fund social impact startups and clean tech startups and really provide the kind of funding that is necessary to grow a hard tech climate related startup. So I think that venture funds have their space in all of this. And when I look at how some of these other big disruptive technologies in the past, like the internet, were funded, these are also, government projects for a really long time, government supported, and then private sector came in to help develop additional components of it. But I think there's got to be a lot more collaboration in the capital space between government, kind of public funds, private funds like venture funds and other kinds of private investors, because they all have different kinds of requirements for their return on capital. And so when taken separately and not collaboratively, when they're separate, it can be really hard to like weave those pieces all together to provide the full funding support that a company might need. But with more conversations and collaboration, you can kind of work together to slot in the right kinds of funding opportunity for the particular company working with the key potential partners, and also bringing together other kinds of experience with different kinds of markets as part of that.
Okay. Amy, and then Adria, will have you round out this one.
Yeah, I think Joe already mentioned the great points around catalytic capital, which is, kind of the innovation or the kind of the bread and butter and Prime's model. All the capital coming in is, inherently patient and flexible, as Joe mentioned. And we really want to use that inherently patient and flexible capital to help de-risk early stage climate technologies for follow-on investors. And so where there are more patient and flexible forms of capital, and that's something that a startup really desires, I think that's definitely an avenue to pursue. I would also say that in general in this environment, there are a lot of usual suspects that people go to. I mean, I work, for a VC fund, and people will, say, okay, I can only raise money from VCs, but really think more broadly about what you need and what type of capital is really the right kind of fit for you at your stage. Not all capital is created equal. You may need angels at this point. You may need, government dollars, as Judy mentioned. Maybe a VC is right, but a funding model that is more catalytic versus a conventional capital. I think, really try and think through all of those elements. And then just from a practical note, in the pandemic, there have been a number of VC funds that have pulled back some of their resources in making new investments. They've been more so focused on their portfolio companies. just as the marker of not knowing what's going to happen with the market. So, where it's possible, if you can look on Crunchbase or some of these other websites and see when funds have either recently closed a fund or a new fund that's just started and they have a lot of dry powder, which means, a lot of capital to invest, that might be a more kind of successful or easier route if some of the larger VC funds are focusing more of their capital on their portfolio companies and deploying less into new investments. So just a tip.
And I just wanted to, first amplify what Judy was saying. The government, should be, and I think I'm hopeful that there is movement towards understanding that commercialization of innovative stuff is just a win-win, regardless of your party or politics. It's a return on taxpayer investment, and I think that there will be more of that happening in the future. I know Amy said that Prime, for example, focuses on gigaton scale investment. I think it would be interesting to hear her comment on this, to find ways to find patient capital for things that maybe don't reach that level of greenhouse gas emissions reduction, simply because I think climate change is systemic in terms of where emissions are coming from, and there are going to be a lot of different technologies that may on their own not realize that level of reduction, but may enable it down the line, for example. And so that's of real interest to me, and I think that there should be some innovation around that in terms of finding capital. And then my final comment is that I think there's a real opportunity to get people, just normal people who care about climate, involved in understanding technology as a lever for addressing climate change. So that personally is something I'm very passionate about and have been working on the side to kind of find ways to crowdfund innovation in clean tech.
Thank you, all of you. So it's amazing. We're coming so close to the end of time. We have a lot of really great questions that are coming in. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I want to get a sort of a round table at the end. So I'm going to tell you that question too, so you can be thinking about it. So and it addresses some of the questions that have been coming in, which we're capturing, but there are quite a lot of questions. So thank you everyone for sending those in. So what are some strategies that you all have seen or that your organizations are employing to make more entrepreneurial opportunities available to people who are not currently in your circle, who are not currently in your ecosystem, and maybe that are in communities that you haven't previously touched? How are you finding them? And because that's, I think, one of the challenges. How do you find them, and how do you then sort of enable new technologies to come through? And the question I'm going to ask you at the end, the round robin at the end, so you can be preparing for it, is what's next, and what are you looking for that you're not seeing? What should we be thinking about as a collective? So don't answer that first question. Answer the first question, which is about how do we make entrepreneurship opportunities available to people in different circles and ecosystems, and then we'll talk about the what's next. So let's start with Joe on this one. How about we'll go to Adria and Judy, and then Amy, if you want to chime in too, that's great.
This question is so important because I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and I think that the fallback answer for a lot of investors when asked about why there's a lack of diversity in their portfolio is that there's a pipeline problem, and that may be true, but it's their pipeline problem, not the pipeline's problem. They need to figure out a way to tap into the right pipeline. And so what I would say about 80% of my time right now is being spent building partner relationships, reaching out, finding people I've never talked to before, talking with them, asking them who else I should be talking to, making sure that they understand what it is that VertueLab does, and making sure that they understand that we have an equity lens and that we are excited for and eager to learn about new opportunities. And we're really pushing ourselves to expand and foster our networks right now. And I think that there's a lot more to be done. One once that's finished. I don't think that's ever finished, actually. It's just kind of going to be an ongoing process. But I think the encouraging thing is that for every one of these conversations that I have, I'm hearing about 10 more organizations or individuals that I never knew about before and that are doing amazing work and with completely new networks that I never even was aware of. And so I would just encourage anyone who's in a similar position to begin to have those conversations and begin asking those questions, because you will be blown away by the sheer volume of untapped resource out there and just amazing people. So.
For our program, I totally agree with you, Joe. I feel like our first conversation around how do we expand the number of people, good people with good ideas who are coming to us, was, well, you know, by the time they get to us, it's already too late. But I think if after revisiting that and thinking about it more, we realized that I think it's more what we might be saying to people, and we needed to think about how we were talking about our opportunity at CRI as a program for people to come in to develop technologies. And so we've been trying to shift the language we use. I think even the word entrepreneur just doesn't appeal to certain groups of people. And so we've been trying to create space and signal flexibility, you know, for different situations that people might have, because a 2-year commitment to a program is a huge commitment. So I think, and it's always generally been true that when innovators come to us and they have a good idea, we're willing to work with them, say they can't move right away or that sort of thing. So we've been trying to make it more appealing in that way. But I think there's a lot more room to just go out there and talk to people in the middle of their graduate school careers in STEM, for example, to let them know that this is a possibility they can start ruminating on right now.
And I'm glad that that's how, Adria, that's how you kind of concluded your point, because I was going to say, you know, approaching students. And so approaching students in graduate school who are, you know, becoming experts in their technology or in whatever they're building is really important, because as investors, we're looking for the unique, you know, the uniqueness of the technology in a company, the defendability. And a lot of times that's a really difficult bar to hit without that extensive education in STEM. And so then, you know, I also think about how do we just get people excited about STEM and business from a younger age, so that they can set, you know, that interest carries through this very long extended time required to build that kind of expertise. And I think one of the ways could also be more active engagement between folks like us who are actively working in this sector with the kinds of programs that are trying to inspire youth to explore these fields. And so if it becomes more of a real career prospect and an exciting one, maybe we'll do a better job of having stronger diversity in STEM in general.
Yeah, I was just going to be super quick that I loved what everyone said, and the STEM point, particularly from Judy, is something that we've been thinking a lot about. And how are we going into universities and inspiring or letting people know that this is a pathway that they should consider, you know, if they've got the, you know, the tools and techniques. And so making sure we're going to a kind of a broad swath of universities, I think, is important. So getting outside of your immediate network and, you know, creating, you know, links and also partnerships with fellowship programs. There are fellowship programs that exclusively focus on graduate school for people of color or for women, and starting to deepen those partnerships, so that way when you've got either undergrads or grad students who are coming through particular programs, they are aware that this is an option and that there are people out there in this broader clean tech and climate tech space who would love to support them.
So the final question for everyone is that, and we're going to make it a lightning round. What are you not seeing that you'd like to see? What are some opportunities that people should be thinking of? And how about we'll go Adria, Judy, Amy, and then end with Joe.
This may feel like a cop-out, but I want to see more women applying to our program. We see so many men apply to the program, and I want to call out to women to just step up and say, I might not be totally sure about this, but I'm going to apply anyway. Other than that, nothing immediately comes to mind. The lightning sort of shook all of the good ideas out of my head.
Totally.
Judy.
Yeah, this is hard. There's so many things. But it's hard to pull through one. I think that I would really like to see more circular economy startups that are, and venture capital funds. There's a few out there who focus in this space, but figuring out what our role is in supporting these kinds of resource efficient circular economy kinds of startups, because a lot of times we focus on energy, and energy is embodied in materials and resources more broadly as well. And there's whole industries that we can disrupt if we can play in that space too.
Okay, Amy.
So on the industry point, I would love for someone or for a group of people to decarbonize some of these kind of really heavy industries. I'm thinking cement, I'm thinking iron, I'm thinking steel, I'm thinking industrial processy, things that are not sexy, but we really, need to have breakthrough climate solutions. So that's my wish, or I think that's one of the things that we need moving forward.
And Joe.
Yeah, at VertueLab, we have put a lot of our strategy in around the project drawdown framework. And anybody on this call who has not encountered project drawdown yet, I strongly encourage you to go to drawdown.org and check it out. They have done an incredible international multi-year research project around what are the potential for carbon reductions across different solutions, from land-based solutions to industrial to across the board. They've sort of ranked what the priorities are, or not priorities, but what the highest potential impacts are of different solutions. And it has always fascinated me that amongst the technology solutions, the one that has the greatest potential for impact is alternative refrigerant management. And it's like the least sexy thing you could possibly imagine. And yet, I mean, if we could solve for the problem of refrigerants, this is huge. So it's not just the refrigerant itself, but it's how it's managed, and how leaks are captured, are stopped, or leaked refrigerant is captured. And and there's a circular economy potential there as well, with recycling or conversion of those refrigerants. And I see very little conversation about that, and I'd love for that to change.
So we have reached the end of time. Thank you again for all of your questions from those of you who have been writing in. We are capturing all of those. And thank you to our esteemed panelists for not only your time today, but your leadership in these important topics. The day-to-day work that happens to pull these companies through with catalytic investments is critical. And so I just say thank you for your everyday work. And with that, I want to thank each of your organizations for lending you to us for half an hour, about an hour now. But with that, I'm going to sign off and say thank you to everyone for your time today. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.